One is I always have trouble with students getting them to understand the notion of the politics that's invested in everyday experience. And so I tell them about something that I actually did. When my children were growing up, I noticed that they read cereal boxes every morning, which is kind of a repetitive activity. You always wonder why they can find the same cereal box interesting every single morning. And so what I did was to go out and buy clear plastic boxes, poured their cereal into it, and inserted my own text in the sides. And so if it was really a heavy sugared cereal, I'd put this big fat dumpy kid, as they'd look 2 hours afterwards in school if they ate this stuff, over on the ingredients. The likelihood of any of the added vitamins would actually be absorbed by the body. Down later, I put the labor practices as a catalog, the percent of the total price of the cereal that goes to the farmer. And what's interesting about this is that you immediately see, of course, that my text is a political text. But somehow they missed that Kellogg's already was. Right? The Post and Kellogg's messages were that as every bit as political as mine. It was simply a different politics. And students, the initial response to this, how could you manipulate your kids, quickly gets transformed into this, oh my God, they already were. And the question only is, who do we trust to do this, right? And of course, the actual experience of my children belied my own students' worst fear, because actually it engaged a lot of very interesting breakfast discussions. Because once you saw that there was an option as to what could be there, they had also things about what would we want to be there, right? And of course they engaged, actually my cereal got there too. I had this heavy brand cereal, and so they put this person on a toilet on the front. Because what it does is say, as a society, we can re-engage the most simple and routine thing in life to show how deeply political it is, how asymmetry gets based in every single product we own, and how we can engage in a way of decentering that and reopening discussion. Okay? So that's one of the examples I give. Another one which I actually like, which is a little more complicated, I had visitors from Sweden, and they had a little girl whose age was 6, who wasn't used to the dogs in Boulder. If you've been around Boulder very long, you know that all the dogs they're everywhere and they're big. And so we were walking down a trail, and this dog came up and quickly came at her and was barking and wanted to lick her face and all this, and she hid behind my legs. And the person who had the dog quickly came up and said, "Don't worry, it's a nice dog." And I took that for granted as being, okay, that's what you do. And that night she told her mother that she was afraid of dogs. And suddenly I started rethinking this. What did we just do? Well, we did something incredibly political in a power-laden situation. And you can do this by reconstructing it. Think for a second where she is. If you were at the height of the dog, it came at you, and its mouth was open about the same size as your whole head. And in the doing of this, that it was making a noise at about 120 decibels at that distance, roughly the sound at the behind of a jet engine. And when it made this noise, it sprayed you with all sorts of fluids, and they smelled bad. Now, there's a lot of ways of understanding what Matilda did other than being afraid. I mean, she may have found this repugnant, or since she was actually from Vietnam, she might have thought the dog was a good one to eat. In other words, there are a lot of things that she might have did, but what we did was interesting. We quickly defined for her what her experience was. And we were in a power relationship to do that, giving her no opportunity to say, that's not my experience, to giving her the capacity to speak back and say, no, it's this rather than that. And we defined not only her experience, but that it was hers and she was deficient for having it. But we don't see that casual encounter on the trail as a power-laden thing where we just did a tremendous amount of violence in defining for a person their feeling and making them responsible for what we're doing. But in looking at these everyday things, which I think as a critical theorist, you walk around the world and see them everywhere, you start seeing the numerous ways and the complicated ways that power and asymmetry come to shift our decisions, to make people and give them certain kind of disadvantages, and of course fail for all of us, because we also failed on the trail, because Matilda's feelings and thoughts can't become part of our discussion, because she merely became a particular way that we understood her in our own prior discussion. And so this is what I think it does, is that you suddenly become attuned to the ways in which life becomes produced, and the power relationships are there, and you see that this is not just occasionally, an unethical person at Enron or WorldCom. It's not just occasionally a media message trying to distort or persuade. It's our life. And the critical theory is not an abstract thing that we learn in school. It's a way of walking about the world and suddenly seeing and experiencing and engaging it differently.